There was a movie that came out in 2005 that honestly, I didn't watch it. I didn't watch it because I wasn't really interested in it. I didn't think much about it until yesterday. And then I decided, 15 years after the fact, that that movie has some really interesting points to it. It's called V for Vendetta. You might want to check it out. It's on Netflix right now. Ironic that it's on Netflix right now. Ironic. Or is it? Welcome to Leading Leaders Podcast. 5-minute videos, 5 days a week. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. I had an interesting phone call yesterday from one of those numbers that you don't recognize, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to take it or not. Turned out we had a decent conversation, and then back and forth a couple of times, and we ended up talking for almost an hour in this random conversation. Somebody I didn't know from anywhere. They live in New Jersey. And we talked about kind of what's going on in the world today. And it was, in fact, his idea that I watch V for Vendetta. I didn't even know that it was on Netflix. I hadn't paid any attention to that. But he said you'd be amazed at the parallels and the similarities to what's going on in the streets today. Not just what's going on in the street, but what's going on in the media, and how certain amounts of information are being controlled and certain things are being told because, well, they're supposed to, and certain people are being told you have to do it like this and you can't do it like that and you better not have one of those. And it was really kind of fascinating to look at today's events, the certain things that get silenced and the certain things that get promoted, and the ideologies that are protected and the ideologies that are crushed, and the people who are trotted out to be the bad guys and the ones that are trotted out to be the good guys. The real irony was, I think, that V for Vendetta, as you watched it, and if you haven't watched it, I encourage you to watch it. It's fascinating. It is an older movie, and 15 years old doesn't seem like that old, but if you're an 18-year-old, it came out when you were 3. If you're in college now, you were probably 5 or 6 when that movie came out, and there's no way that you would go back and watch something that old. It's like watching a black and white movie, right? But the parallels are fascinating. And narrative, I think, is the most fascinating thing. Not just the narrative of the movie, but the narrative of the entire plot line. The vendetta, the revenge, the vengeance that was sought by the individual in the movie. It had a specific core and purpose to it, but it was very individual and very, very purposeful, very personal. And yet it was overlaid in such a way that it became a national social issue. Ironic, really. What was that old phrase, life mimics art or art mimics life? It's really hard to tell sometimes which one leads and which one follows, isn't it? See, as leaders, we're responsible for the narrative. Leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. And where does the influence come from? Well, it comes from the narrative. The narrative that you say inside your head, the narrative that you say inside your own life, the narrative that you say to the people around you, especially those that you lead and influence, your children, your family, your employees, the words that you share with them, the behaviors that you demonstrate in front of them, those are the narrative that will decide the decisions that they make. Those are the ones that will feed into their ideas of success or failure, their ideas of politics, of faith, of family values. Everything that you say and do informs the decisions they'll make for the next 2, 10, 25 years. And if you're being led by a narrative rather than leading the narrative, then you have to ask the question, is the narrative that I'm being led by one that I agree with? Is it the one that I want my family to follow? Is it the one that I want my community to follow? Is it the one that I want my nation to follow? Do I agree with that narrative, or is there something off about it? Is it more about control than it is about truth? Is it more about keeping people under the thumb than it is about empowering people to rise up? That's a very important question. And it's an important question that we need to be asking today as much as any other time in our history. It's a question we need to be asking about our families. about our culture, about our society, and about our nation? Are you led by the narrative, or are you leading the narrative? In your circle of influence, at least, I challenge you to be well read, to be well studied, to understand what's going on, and to lead the narrative in everything that you say and in everything that you do. Don't just be led by a narrative, lead the narrative. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, or Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.